There are mysteries that get solved decades later. There are mysteries that remain open, but slowly fade from memory. And then there are mysteries so strange, so inexplicable, that even after 45 years, no one can agree on what actually happened, or whether what the evidence suggests is even possible. Welcome to Dark Case Files. I'm your host, and before we journey deep into the West Virginia mountains to explore one of Appalachia's most baffling unsolved cases, I need you to do something. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. The stories we cover here are the ones that defy explanation and demand investigation. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. This story takes place in isolated West Virginia, but its mystery has captivated people around the world. Today, we're traveling to October 1978, to a remote cabin in the Appalachian wilderness. To three sisters who went there for a weekend retreat and never came home alive. And to a crime scene so bizarre, so contradictory, that investigators, forensic experts, and amateur sleuths have been debating what happened for over 4 decades. This is the story of the Richards sisters, and it's a mystery that has no satisfactory explanation, only questions that lead to more questions, and evidence that seems to point in every direction at once. Greenbrier County, West Virginia, October 1978. The Appalachian Mountains are ablaze with fall colors, brilliant reds, oranges, and golds covering the steep hillsides. It's a beautiful time of year, but also a time when the weather can turn quickly, when sudden storms roll through the mountains, and when darkness falls early and completely. The Richards family owned a small cabin about 15 miles outside the town of Lewisburg. It sat at the end of a rough dirt road, accessible only by 4-wheel drive, surrounded by dense forest. The nearest neighbor was over 3 miles away. It was the kind of place people went to escape. No phone, no electricity, just a wood stove for heat, kerosene lamps for light, and the silence of the wilderness. The 3 Richards sisters, Margaret, age 28, Diane, age 26, and Carol, age 24, had planned a weekend retreat at the cabin. They were close, despite their different personalities. Margaret was a school teacher in Charleston, organized and responsible. Diane was an artist who lived in Asheville, North Carolina, free-spirited and creative. Carol was a nursing student in Lexington, Kentucky, serious and dedicated to her studies. They hadn't all been together in months, and they decided the cabin would be the perfect place to reconnect. They planned to arrive Friday evening, October 13th, spend the weekend hiking, talking, and enjoying each other's company, and return home on Sunday evening, October 15th. On Friday afternoon, all 3 sisters left from their respective locations, driving to West Virginia. Margaret, who lived closest, arrived first and opened up the cabin. Diane arrived around 6 p.m. Carol arrived just after 7 p.m. as darkness was falling. A neighbor who lived down the mountain, Thomas Griffith, who checked on the cabin occasionally for the Richards family, saw lights in the windows around 8 p.m. when he drove past on his way home. Everything seemed normal. That was the last confirmed sighting of the Richards sisters alive. On Monday morning, October 16th, when none of the sisters showed up to work or school, people began to worry. Margaret's principal called her parents. Diane's roommate called Margaret's parents. Carol's study group leader called Margaret's parents. All reported the same thing. The sisters hadn't returned and weren't answering calls. The Richards parents, John and Martha, immediately thought of the cabin. They drove out Monday afternoon, taking almost 2 hours to navigate the rough mountain roads. What they found when they arrived would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The cabin door was standing open. The wood stove had gone cold. And inside, scattered across the single main room, were the bodies of all 3 daughters. John Richards stumbled out of the cabin, unable to process what he'd seen. Martha went inside, checked each daughter for a pulse, and found none. She ran back out and told John to drive to the nearest house with a phone Thomas Griffith's place, 3 miles down the mountain. Police and emergency services arrived within 90 minutes. The scene they encountered was unlike anything they'd ever investigated. All 3 sisters were dead. But the circumstances of their deaths were strange, no, stranger than strange. They were inexplicable. Margaret was lying on the floor near the wood stove, on her back, arms at her sides. She was fully clothed in the outfit she'd been wearing when she arrived: jeans, a sweater, hiking boots. There was no obvious injury, no blood, no signs of trauma. Diane was slumped in a chair at the table, her head resting on her folded arms as if she'd fallen asleep. She too was fully clothed, with no apparent injuries. Carol was on the floor in the corner of the room, curled in a fetal position, also fully clothed and showing no visible trauma. There was no sign of struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken dishes. The cabin was neat and orderly, as if nothing violent had occurred. Food was still on the table, the remains of what appeared to be dinner. 3 plates, 3 forks, partially eaten food now growing cold. 3 cups of tea still sitting where they'd been placed. The cabin door had been open when the parents arrived, but there was no sign of forced entry. The windows were intact. Nothing appeared to have been stolen. The sisters' purses, wallets, and car keys were all present. And most bizarrely, all 3 cars were still parked outside, undisturbed. If someone had attacked the sisters, how had they arrived and left without a vehicle on a road that was impassable on foot? The Greenbrier County Sheriff's Department immediately treated the scene as a potential homicide. 3 young women, dead in an isolated cabin, with no obvious cause of death. Foul play seemed likely, but as investigators examined the scene more closely, nothing made sense. Sheriff David Colvin, who led the investigation, later described it as the most perplexing case one encountered in 30 years of law enforcement. Every piece of evidence seemed to contradict every other piece of evidence. The bodies showed no signs of violence. No gunshot wounds, stab wounds, or blunt force trauma. No ligature marks to suggest strangulation. No signs of sexual assault. The sisters were exactly as they would have been if they had simply stopped living. The food on the table was tested for. Poison. Nothing. The tea was tested. Nothing. The water supply was checked. Clean. The air in the cabin was analyzed for carbon monoxide or other toxic gases. Normal levels. Autopsies were performed by the state medical examiner in Charleston. The results were baffling. Margaret had died of cardiac arrest, but she was 28 years old, athletic, with no history of heart problems. The autopsy found no underlying condition that would explain sudden cardiac death. Diane had died of respiratory failure. Her lungs had simply stopped working. Again, no underlying condition, no disease, no obstruction. Her lungs were healthy. They had just stopped. Carol had also died of cardiac arrest, though her heart showed slightly different pathology than Margaret's. Like her sister, she had no history of heart disease and no identifiable cause for the arrest. The medical examiner's conclusion: 3 healthy young women had died of sudden, simultaneous organ failure with no identifiable cause. It was medically unprecedented. Toxicology screens were expanded to test for rare poisons, industrial chemicals, and even biological agents. Everything came back negative, or within normal ranges. The investigation turned to potential suspects. Had someone with a grudge against the family killed the sisters? But how? What method of murder leaves no trace, no evidence, no signs of struggle? Police investigated everyone in the sisters' lives. Ex-boyfriends, co-workers, classmates, neighbors. No one had motive, and more importantly, no one could explain how they would have killed 3 people simultaneously without leaving any evidence. Thomas Griffith, the neighbor who had seen lights at the cabin Friday night, was thoroughly investigated. He had a solid alibi for the entire weekend. He had been in Charleston visiting his daughter. With dozens of witnesses, the road to the cabin had no other tire tracks besides those of the three sisters, vehicles, and the parents' car. In the soft dirt, tracks would have been obvious. If someone had come to the cabin, they would have left evidence. Police dogs were brought in to search for any scent trails leading away from the cabin. The dogs found nothing unusual, only the scents of the three sisters and their parents. As days turned into weeks, the investigation stalled. Sheriff Coleman held a press conference acknowledging that they had no suspects, no clear cause of death, and no explanation for what had happened. The case attracted national media attention. Reporters descended on Greenbrier County, and the story made headlines across the country. Three sisters die mysteriously in remote cabin. Appalachian death mystery baffles investigators. No clues in bizarre triple death. Theories began to emerge, some plausible, others wild. Theory 1. Poison, despite negative toxicology results. Some speculated that a rare or unknown poison had been used that didn't show up in standard tests. But this didn't explain how the poison was administered. Nothing in the food or drinks tested positive, and there were no injection marks or other signs of forced ingestion. Theory 2. Carbon monoxide. Some suggested that faulty ventilation in the cabin had caused carbon monoxide poisoning. But testing showed normal air quality, and the symptoms didn't match CO poisoning. Plus, the cabin door had been found open, which would have ventilated any gases. Theory 3. A pact. Could the sisters have made a suicide pact? But there was no note, no evidence of suicidal ideation in any of their lives, and no method of suicide evident. How do three people simultaneously commit suicide without any tools or substances? Theory 4. Infection. Could a rapid-acting infection or disease have killed all three simultaneously? Medical experts said this was virtually impossible. Infections don't work that way, and the autopsies showed no signs of acute illness. Theory 5. Something in the cabin. Some speculated that something in the cabin itself had killed the mold, spores, or some environmental toxin. But the cabin was thoroughly tested and found to be safe. The parents had stayed there many times without incident. Theory 6. Murder. The most obvious theory, but also the most problematic. If someone killed the sisters, how did they do it without leaving any evidence? How did they arrive and leave without vehicle tracks? And what was the motive? None of the theories fit all the evidence. Each explained some aspects of the case, but left other aspects unexplained. As the official investigation stalled, amateur investigators and internet sleuths became fascinated by the case. In the decades since 1978, the Richards sisters mystery has been analyzed and debated in countless forums, podcasts, and true crime communities. New theories have emerged, some more credible than others. The infrasound theory. Some researchers have suggested that infrasound, low-frequency sound waves below human hearing, could have killed the sisters. Certain natural phenomena can produce infrasound that affects the human body, potentially causing cardiac arrhythmia and respiratory distress. The mountainous terrain could theoretically create conditions for infrasound generation, but this theory has significant problems. Infrasound rarely causes death, and it would be extraordinarily unlikely to kill three people simultaneously with such precision. Plus, investigators didn't report any equipment malfunctions or strange sensations at the scene. Common effects of strong infrasound. The electrical phenomenon theory. Some have speculated that a rare atmospheric or geological electrical phenomenon could have created a field that disrupted the sisters' cardiac and respiratory systems. Ball lightning or other unusual electrical events have been documented in the Appalachian region. But again, the precision required to kill all three sisters without damaging the cabin, starting fires, or leaving any electrical burns makes this highly improbable. The contaminated water theory. despite initial tests showing clean water. Some theorize that a temporary contamination, perhaps from a dead animal upstream or a chemical spill, poisoned the sisters. The contaminant could have been washed away by rain before the cabin was discovered. This theory has some merit, but it doesn't explain why the standard toxicology tests showed nothing, or why the symptoms, sudden cardiac and respiratory failure, don't match typical waterborne illness. The ritual killing theory. Some of the more outlandish theories suggest occult ritual, particularly given the date, Friday the 13th, and the remote, isolated location. This theory proposes that the sisters were somehow cursed, or hexed. This is, of course, not credible from a scientific standpoint. But it's worth noting that the Appalachian region has a long history of folk magic and superstition, and some locals genuinely believe supernatural forces were involved. The government experiment theory, conspiracy. Theorists have suggested that the sisters were unwitting subjects of a government experiment involving chemical or biological agents, possibly tested from aircraft or drones. There's no evidence for this, and it requires believing in a vast conspiracy to cover up the deaths of 3 random young women. Occam's razor suggests we should look for simpler explanations. The revisited poison theory. Modern forensic toxicologists have noted that in 1978, testing for certain exotic toxins was limited or impossible. Some theorists suggest a sophisticated poison could have been used that simply couldn't be detected at the time. This is one of the more plausible theories. Several naturally occurring toxins from certain plants, fungi, or marine organisms could theoretically cause the symptoms observed and might not have been detected in 1978. But this still doesn't explain who poisoned them or how. In 2003, the case was reviewed by a team of forensic pathologists using modern techniques. They examined the autopsy reports, photos, and preserved tissue samples. Their conclusion: the deaths remained unexplained. They found no evidence that had been missed in 1978, and modern testing of the preserved tissues showed nothing new. One pathologist noted something interesting in his report. The timing of the deaths appeared to be nearly simultaneous. Based on rigor mortis, body temperature, and other factors measured when the bodies were discovered, all 3 sisters died within minutes of each other, possibly even within seconds. This simultaneity is perhaps the most baffling aspect of the case. 3 healthy young women in the same room, all suddenly experiencing fatal organ failure at essentially the same moment. What could cause that? In 2015, a team of researchers from West Virginia University proposed a new theory: acute toxic exposure to an unknown biological agent. They suggested that the sisters may have been exposed to a rare fungal spore or toxic mold that caused rapid multi-organ failure. They pointed to similar cases in medical literature where exposure to certain mycotoxins caused sudden death. They noted that the Appalachian region has unique microclimates that could support unusual fungal species not commonly encountered. The theory gained some traction, and in 2016, the cabin, which had been abandoned and was scheduled for demolition, was thoroughly tested for fungal contamination. Advanced techniques not available in 1978 were used to analyze wood samples, dust, and air quality. The results were inconclusive. Several unusual fungal species were found, but none known to be acutely toxic to humans. The researchers admitted their theory couldn't be proven or disproven with the available evidence. The Richards family has never found peace. John Richards died in 1995, reportedly still tormented by the mystery of his daughter's deaths. Martha Richards, now in her 80s, rarely speaks publicly about the case, but in a 2018 interview, she said, "I've spent 40 years asking why. Why them? Why that night? What happened in that cabin? I've heard every theory, read every article, spoken to every expert. And I still don't know. I don't think I'll ever know. But I need to believe there's an answer, even if I never find it. The cabin where the sisters died was demolished in 2017. The land was sold, and the new owners built a modern home on the site. They report no unusual experiences, no hauntings, no strange phenomena. It's just a house in the mountains, like thousands of others in West Virginia, but locals still avoid the area after dark. The story has become part of Appalachian folklore, a cautionary tale about the mysteries that lurk in the isolated mountains, about things that can't be explained by science or reason. I visited the site in 2024, 46 years after the tragedy. The new house is beautiful all glass and modern architecture, a stark contrast to the rustic cabin that once stood there. The owners, who knew the history when they bought the property, were kind enough to let me look around, standing there, looking at the mountains rising on all sides. I tried to imagine what had happened that October night in 1978. 3 sisters, sitting down to dinner, laughing and talking, unaware that within hours they would all be dead. What did they experience in those final moments? Did they know something was wrong? Did they have time to be afraid? Or did death come so quickly that they never even realized what was happening? The more I researched this case, the more I realized that the mystery isn't just about how the sisters died. It's about the limitations of human knowledge itself. We like to believe that with enough investigation, enough science, enough time, we can explain anything. The Richards sisters case challenges that assumption. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, despite all our technology and expertise, we encounter something that defies explanation, and we're left with only questions. Over the years, several people have claimed to have solved the mystery. In 1982, a man wrote to the sheriff's department, claiming he had killed the sisters using a psychic weapon. He was investigated and found to be mentally ill with no credible information. About the case. In 1995, a woman came forward claiming her father, now deceased, had confessed to poisoning the sisters as part of a satanic ritual. Investigation revealed she had a history of making false accusations, and there was no evidence to support her claims. In 2007, an anonymous letter was sent to a West Virginia newspaper, claiming knowledge of what happened. The letter suggested the sisters had been killed by a jealous lover of one of them, using an exotic poison obtained from overseas. The letter provided no specific details and could not be verified. The writer never came forward again. Each of these claims was thoroughly investigated and debunked. They were attention-seeking hoaxes or the delusions of troubled individuals. They brought the family pain and false hope, but no actual answers. The official case remains open. The Greenbrier County Sheriff's Department maintains a file on the Richards sisters, and technically, the investigation is still active. But realistically, after 46 years, the chances of solving the case are vanishingly small. Physical evidence has degraded or been lost. Witnesses have died or forgotten crucial details. Technology has advanced, but without new evidence to analyze, that technology is useless. Sheriff Coleman, who led the original investigation, died in 2010. Before his death, he gave an interview to a local newspaper about the case. His final words on the subject were, "I've investigated hundreds of deaths. Murder, suicide, accidents. I've seen terrible things. But the Richards sisters case is the only one that truly haunts me. Because I failed those girls. I failed their family. I couldn't give them answers. And I think that's because the answers don't exist, at least not in any way we can understand." The Richards sisters case has had a lasting impact on forensic science and death investigation protocols. It's often cited in training materials as an example of a case where all standard investigative procedures were followed correctly. All available technology was used appropriately, And yet the mystery remained unsolved. The case has led to several changes in how unexplained deaths are investigated. First, it highlighted the need for more comprehensive toxicology screening. In the decades since 1978, the range of substances that can be detected and identified has expanded dramatically. Modern forensic labs can now detect trace amounts of hundreds of substances that were completely undetectable in 1978. It emphasized the importance of preserving evidence for future analysis. Tissue samples from the Richards sisters were carefully preserved, allowing them to be retested years later using advanced techniques. This has become standard practice in unexplained death cases. Third, it demonstrated the value of interdisciplinary investigation. The Richards case has been reviewed by toxicologists, pathologists, environmental scientists, physicists, and even psychologists trying to explain the unexplainable. This collaborative approach is now common in complex death investigations. The case has also become a subject of academic study. Multiple research papers have been written analyzing the evidence from various perspectives. A 2019 paper in the Journal of Forensic Sciences used the Richards case as an example of how cognitive biases can affect death investigation, arguing that investigators may have missed crucial evidence because they were so focused on finding a traditional explanation, murder, suicide, accident, that they couldn't see alternative possibilities. In popular culture, the Richards sisters case has inspired numerous books, podcasts, and even a fictional movie, though the filmmakers changed the names and details. The case has a particular appeal to true crime enthusiasts because it's genuinely unsolved. There's no consensus solution, no official explanation that everyone accepts. Several dedicated researchers have made the Richards sisters case their obsession. One woman, Elizabeth Morrison, has spent over 20 years investigating the case. She's interviewed hundreds of people, reviewed thousands of documents, and traveled to West Virginia dozens of times. Her website, Truth for the Richards Sisters, is the most comprehensive resource on the case. I spoke with Elizabeth in 2024. She told me, "I started researching this case in 2002, thinking I could solve it in a few months. 22 years later, I'm no closer to the truth than when I started. But I can't let it go. Those 3 women deserve answers. Their family deserves answers. And I think the answers are out there. We just haven't found them yet." When I asked her what she thought happened, she said, "Honestly, I don't know. Some days I think it was poison. Some days I think it was an environmental phenomenon we don't understand yet. Some days I think it was something so bizarre that we don't even have a framework to conceptualize it. All I know is that 3 healthy women went to a cabin for a weekend and ended up dead with no explanation. That's not normal. That's not natural. And that's not right." The Richards family has established a small memorial scholarship in the sisters' names at their respective schools. The Margaret Richards Memorial Teaching Scholarship helps aspiring teachers in West Virginia. The Diane Richards Memorial Art Grant supports young artists in North Carolina. The Carol Richards Memorial Nursing Scholarship assists nursing students in Kentucky. These scholarships are quiet, understated memorials to 3 women whose deaths were anything but. They represent lives cut short, potential unfulfilled, and a family's determination that their daughters be remembered for who they were, not just how they died. I reached out to several of the scholarship recipients. One, a young teacher who received the Margaret Richards Scholarship in 2020, told me, "I didn't know about the mystery when I received the scholarship. When I learned the story, it was heartbreaking. But it also inspired me. Margaret Richards loved teaching, and now her legacy helps other teachers. That's powerful. That's a way of living on, even after tragedy." What happened to Margaret, Diane, and Carol Richards on that October night in 1978? After researching this case extensively, interviewing experts, reviewing evidence, And exploring every theory, I can offer no definitive answer. And that, perhaps, is the point. The Richards sisters case reminds us that there are still things we don't understand, questions we can't answer, mysteries that resist all attempts at explanation. In an age where we can sequence DNA, detect particles smaller than atoms, and send probes to distant planets, we still can't explain why 3 healthy women died simultaneously in a remote cabin. That should humble us. It should remind us that for all our technological advancement and scientific knowledge, there are still gaps in our understanding. Nature or fate, or whatever force governs the universe, still holds secrets we cannot penetrate. But it should also inspire us. Because somewhere, somehow, there is an explanation. Perhaps it's something we haven't discovered yet, a rare toxin, an unusual phenomenon, a combination of factors that has never been documented before. Perhaps future scientists, with better tools and broader knowledge, will review the evidence and suddenly see what we've all been missing. Or perhaps the answer is simpler than we think, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to ask the right question or look at the evidence from a new angle. The Richards sisters deserve that answer. Their family deserves that answer. And until we find it, this case will remain one of Appalachia's most profound unsolved mysteries. This has been the story of Margaret, Diane, and Carol Richards' 3 sisters who went to a cabin for a weekend and never came home. A case that has defied explanation for 46 years. A mystery that challenges everything we think we know about death, investigation, and the limits of human understanding. Thank you for listening to this episode of Dark Case Files. Unsolved cases like this are both frustrating and fascinating. They remind us that some mysteries may never be solved, but they're worth investigating nonetheless. If you made it through this entire episode, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss future cases. And share this video maybe. Someone out there has information or insight that could finally solve this decades-old mystery. Leave a comment and tell me, what do you think happened to the Richards sisters? Have you heard any theories we didn't cover? Do you think this case will ever be solved? And if you know something, if you have information about this case that has never been shared, please come forward. Contact the Greenbrier County Sheriff's Department. The case is still open. Tips are still being investigated. It's not too late for the truth to emerge. Rest in peace, Margaret, Diane, and Carol Richards. You were loved. You are remembered. And somewhere, somehow, the truth about what happened to you exists. We may not have found it yet, but we haven't stopped looking. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and never stop asking questions. Because every mystery, no matter how inexplicable, has an answer. We just have to be persistent enough, creative enough, and open-minded enough to find it. This has been Dark Case Files. I'm your host, and the mystery of the Richards sisters may be unsolved ... but it is not forgotten. And as long as people keep investigating, keep questioning, keep searching for truth, there's always hope that someday, somehow, we'll finally understand what happened on that October night in 1978. Remember their names, honor their memory, and never stop seeking answers.